So I realized that a lot of you don't want to accept the fact that your ancestors were sent over here to the British American colonies that you call America as convicts. The Old Bailey Proceedings don't lie. They're telling you exactly what happened and who were all involved. The problem is many of you don't want to accept the fact that you come from ancestry that were known, or ancestors who were known as criminals. Now, I'm not saying all your ancestors who were listed as criminals were true criminals, but based off of the legal proceedings, what was considered lawful at that time, they were listed as criminals. So it's no longer you talking about what they did to your ancestors, because it's not a black or white thing historically back then during that time. This was really about what? It was about politics. Everything that was happening during this time was politically backed. So, and it was backed by the so-called ecclesiastical domain, aka the church or the Catholic Church. So once again, accept what the record says historically via the legal proceedings, because that's what's going to help you get out of here. All right, proceedings from the Old Bailey, just to show you that yes, some of your ancestors were sent over via transportation, and then some who were indigenous to the territory we call the British Isles, which they could be either Englishman, Irishman, or Scottish man. You're still going to be able to see and know that based off of the time frame, as well the surname that they had, because there was rules when it came down to having surnames or names back then, especially underneath the kingdom. So here we have William Basham. He was charged for theft, grand larceny. That was on December 10th, 1684. So do the math in regards to who was running the joint in 1684, which monarchy. And yes, it was the Stuarts, for those who want to know. Um, it, it says his verdict was not guilty. So let's go ahead and read the case. It says William Basham, a Negro. So Basham, as we can see, is tied to folks who were considered so-called Negro, at least from what we're reading. He was indicted for stealing 6 ounces of silver on the 31st of October from John Russell Esquire of St. Paul's, Covent Garden. It appeared upon evidence that he offering to sell the said silver, being part of a broken chafing dish. He was stopped by the goldsmith in the place of his inquiry, or they inquired into, which he refused to sell, but in the end, believing found he was a servant to Esquire Russell, the justice of peace, before whom he was carried, committed him, but he denying that fact upon trial, and his master not prosecuting for want of evidence to prove the felony, he was acquitted. All right, so it shows William Basham was acquitted of this felony offense, which pretty much was theft. All right, so let's go ahead and check and see where the surname Basham comes from. And of course, we always come to the house of names so we can show you. And Basham History, Family Crest, Coat of Arms. So Mr. Basham was an Englishman. It says the etymology of Basham. The origins of Basham name come from when the Anglo-Saxon tribes ruled over Britain. The name Basham was originally derived from a family having lived in or around either of the settlements called Barsham in Norfolk and Suffolk. So we know, as we can see at this point, that the term or the surname Basham came with the Anglo-Saxon tribes. It means that this Mr. Basham himself was a descendant of the Anglo-Saxons, aka he is who he come from. So he's the Anglo-Saxon, and we already showed you based off of the book from Mr. Thomas William Shore, The Origin of the Anglo-Saxon Tribes, Chapter 7, Our Darker Forefathers. So this goes to prove once again that those Anglo-Saxons, descendants of the Anglo-Saxons, then themselves are, or most of them, which you know today, they should be considered, which we see Mr. Basham, and that is dark skin. All right, let's go ahead and take another look at another case. Here's another case. This one is a little bit more unfortunate. Young brother Thomas Robinson, theft, burglary. This was January 17th, 1724. The verdict was guilty. Its punishment, deletion. It says Thomas Robinson of the parish of St. Margaret, Westminster, was indicted for burglariously breaking the house of Mary Gunnis in the nighttime and stealing divers goods on the 18th of December last. The prisoner was a Negro black boy and asked to come for 2 or 3 times to the prosecutor's house to buy liquors, and the house being broken and the things stolen. She suspected the prisoner, who was Thomas Robinson, and upon search made after him, 3 rings and 32 sterlings in money were found upon him, and 1 ring where he had bid it in the ground on Tower Hill. The boy had confessed the fact before the justice, which confession was read in court. The fact being plainly proved, the jury found him guilty of the indictment, and his punishment was deletion. Now let's go ahead and take a look at what surname Robinson comes from. Once again, this is 1724. Who's running the joint at this moment? King George the First. All right. And as we can see, Robinson itself is an Irish as well as an English surname. The etymology of it: the surname Robinson is a name of ancient Anglo-Saxon origin. It is derived from the baptismal name Robin, which was a diminutive of the personal name Robert, and refers to a son of Robin or Robert. So once again, we see that this young unfortunate brother Robinson is a descendant, or he himself is an Anglo-Saxon based off of the origin of his surname, the territory that he's located, the time frame, and once again, we know when it comes down to the law of names that his surname is the name that he inherited because he wouldn't have received that from no so-called foreigner, and in this time Britain would not be operating with slavery on the so-called books. Now, was slavery still happening in the British colonies? Absolutely. But in England itself, no, slavery was not on the books. And it wasn't on the books legally. That's what I mean. It was not legally on the books. Now, was people probably doing it there? I'm quite sure. I'm quite sure they were. Okay, we have another case. This one is John Everett, violent theft, highway robbery, January 16, 1730. Defendant, once again, John Everett. Session date, January 16, 1730. Verdict, guilty, punishment, deletion. Now, what's going to be different about this is because there's other party who's within this case who we're going to be looking up, and his name is John Coffey. All right, so let's go ahead and see that. And I apologize, it's actually William Coffey. And William Coffey says, a Negro boy being set up to give evidence. The prisoner asked if he was Christian, and he was told he was exposed. That the prisoner at the bar came up to the coachman near Battle Bridge and bid him stop, and bid this deponent look another way, or he would shoot him. But he would look at him, and he was sure the prisoner was the man. So at least what we're reading, that William Coffey was considered a Negro boy. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at where Coffey surname comes from. And we can see Coffey itself goes back to Ireland. So this young William Coffey, who's saying or labeled as a Negro boy, was actually Irish or Gaelic. All right, remember, Great Britain or the Great Britain and Ireland or the British Isles is England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales. And the Bailey or the Old Bailey Proceedings is coming from London. All right, it's the London Criminal Court, the highest criminal court at that time. Says etymology of Coffey. The surname is one of the native Irish surnames that come from the Irish Gaelic language. The original Gaelic form of the name Coffey is Mac Eachit. Hopefully that's how you pronounce it. From the personal name Eachit, which is anglicized as Aggie. It is cognate with the Eachit, which is anglicized as the once common Christian name Aggie. All right, so hopefully I pronounced that right, but if not, hopefully someone could correct it for me. The goal is to learn Gaelic, so therefore we can actually speak our ancestral language, because it is our ancestral language. That unfortunately, because of the various edicts and as much time has went by, that we aren't speaking it today, but now we can. All right, so now we see with this brother Coffey. So this is three cases coming from the Old Bailey brothers and sisters to show you that these were originally indigenous people who come from the territory that we call the British Isles during the time where you saw that so-called slavery was happening here in the British American colonies. And you have brothers who, unfortunately, two of them was guilty and one of them was actually innocent. All right, so it's showing you that we were having rights, or we was able to have our voices heard in these court cases. And unfortunately, we did have some brothers who, were considered guilty based off of the verdict that they received. Let's see what else we can find. All right, so we have another unfortunate case, Jeffrey Murat, and Murat can be spelled Murat, and we're going to see that. And the session date, February 16th, 1737, verdict, guilty is punishment, deletion. Once again, like I'm telling you, brothers and sisters, you're going to find folks who you're related to historically back then who were criminals. And not everybody who was criminal got deleted, things that and that nature. We're going to show you the cases in regards to those who are considered guilty, who was underneath the punishment transportation, which is very important because, like I keep explaining, a lot of those so-called slave ships you're looking for are actually transportation ships. All right, so let's go ahead and continue. The case says Jeffrey Murat otherwise Murat, M-U-R-A-T, a Negro of St. George's, Hanover Square, was indicted for breaking and entering the house of Peregrine Bertie, Esquire, commonly called Marquis of Lindsay, about the hour of 2 in the night, and stealing thence 2 pair of silver breast buckles, valued 20 sterlings, and 2 guineas in money, the property of the said Peregrine Bertie, on February 1st. So like I'm not going to read the whole case. The only thing I wanted you to see was notice that Jeffrey Murat, they see and said, was a Negro. Now we need to know where Murat comes from. So Murat comes from France, Italy, as well as Spain. So he could came from any three of these territories. Now we know Spain was at war with Great Britain at a specific time and things of that nature. So we can't really say it's. I'm not going to say he's from Spain, and it's kind of hard to say even if he's from France because they was warring with France. But let's just go and say, for the sake of argument, that he comes from France because it's spelled with M-U-R-T. So it says the surname Murat was first found in Gascony, an area of southwest France bordering Spain that was part of the province of Guyana and Gascony prior to the French Revolution, where this eminent family has held the family seat since ancient times. All right, so this brother Murat, once again, he could have been French, he could have been Italian, or he could have been Spanish. Whatever it was, he was in the territory that we call the British Isles, aka Great Britain, because he is now seen as a defendant for a case that clearly the verdict was guilty and his punishment was deletion. All right. So, like I keep explaining, brothers and sisters, you have to do your genealogy because you really never know what where your family come from, and you can't constantly keep saying like, "Oh, my family been here" or this and that. Just because you've been here, just because you were born here, don't mean you're from here. Just because you can trace your family here in the so-called 1600s, don't mean that they're originally from here. Where did they come from prior to that? Where did those surnames come from? Because they didn't just come out of thin air. All right. So these are things you have to be able to explain. And unfortunately, I know it's uncomfortable for many of you who accept a specific type of narratives, but it is what it is. Then here's a case where one of the brothers' punishment was transportation based off of his guilty verdict. So we have Mr. Philip Walmsley, theft, grand larceny. The session date October 1770, October 24th, 1770. All right, so this is 6 years before the American Declaration of Independence, brothers and sisters. 6 years before that. All right, and once again, this case is in London. This is in London. So it says Philip Walmsley, a Negro, was indicted for stealing a silver watch valued 20 sterlings, the property of William Gurnall, October 16th. Guilty, transportation. All right, so this shows you he was sentenced to transportation. Transportation, that meant he was exiled or deported out of society, out of the kingdom, and sent to the so-called colonies. So let's go ahead and take a look at that first. Excuse me, after we take a look where his name come from, because that's who he is, who it's in from, then we're going to check and see transportation. Walmsley history, family crest and coat of arms, comes from where? England. Early origins of the Walmsley family. The surname Walmsley was first found in Lancashire at Bickersford and Houghton. In after times, the township of Wiltshire in Lancashire became a possession of the Walmsleys, of whom Sir Thomas Walmsley died seized of the estate in the reign of Charles I. Today, Walmsley is a village in the metropolitan borough of Bury, Greater Manchester. The place name literally meant lake by the wood. So this is showing that Mr. Walmsley family, or he descend from English people, aka he's an Englishman himself. Now he's an Englishman who just got what? Who just got the guilty verdict, and his punishment is transportation. Now we need to know what transportation is. Transportation. The first major innovation in 18th century penal practice was the substantial expansion of the use of transportation. Although it is believed that transportation might lead to the reformation of the offender, the primary motivations behind its punishment were a belief in its deterrent effect and a desire to simply remove hardened criminals from English society to places where they could help establish new colonies. So if they felt that you were undesirable and you had got the punishment of transportation, they could send you up out of the so-called kingdom, brothers and sisters, which many of your ancestors were sent underneath the guilty verdict, and the punishment was transportation. Based off of we can see from Old Bailey Proceedings with his brother Philip Walmsley. And it says in 1776, transportation was halted by the outbreak of the war with America. That's the American Declaration of Independence. Although convicts continued to be sentenced to transportation, male convicts given this sentence was confined to hard labor and hulks on the Thames, while women were imprisoned. Following failed attempts to transport convicts to Africa and the Americas. So they're sending us to so-called Africa and the Americas, not the other way around. They were sending us to Africa and the Americas. Transportation finally resumed in 1787 with a new destination, Australia. This was seen as a far more serious punishment than the emerging punishment of imprisonment, since it involved exile to a distant land. In the early 19th century, as part of the revisions of the criminal law, transportation for life was substituted as the maximum punishment for several offenses which had previously been punishable by death. So transportation meant for life meant you couldn't come back home, brothers and sisters. That's the reason why a lot of your so-called ancestors couldn't return, and that's the reason why nobody came and got them when they kept saying why no one from so-called slave ships or slave territories in Africa and got them, because they didn't come from Africa. They came from Great Britain, aka the British Isles. So once again, you need to now start to see that there's a whole nother narrative that you have been misinformed about, that you now need to go take a look at, because the manuscripts are there, the records are there, brothers and sisters. And if you need help, all you need to do is just Google. Google will bring you to a lot of these platforms or a lot of these websites where you can find this information yourself. So with that being said, stay tuned for part 2, where I'm going to continue to show you some more of these proceedings from the Old Bailey, to show you that how many of your ancestors were sent over here via the guilty verdict and punishment transportation, and then also how many of your ancestors were considered and found innocent. And so it was not just so-called a black or white thing all the time, because a lot of folks who were melanated were still getting exonerated. So with that being said, stay tuned. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. I'm out. Peace.